that it can look at different parts of the room. For instance, it may be a camera like the one I have. I'm going to step away for a second here. And it may be a camera like this, where the camera goes to a whiteboard presentation, and the teacher is able to work on the whiteboard, communicate with the students on the remote side, and then when the teacher's done with that, the teacher goes back to the desk or the podium, and the camera needs to follow the teacher around in that respect. So that's more of an AV thing. That is not really an IT function. That's us as AV professionals providing that functionality. The other thing that we're going to have to consider is, one thing that you may or may not have noticed when my camera moved is the audio changed a little bit. So what happened is when I moved to my whiteboard, I unmuted another microphone that was over closer to my whiteboard so that you could hear me better when I was standing at the whiteboard. And then as I stepped away from that, the microphone muted again so that it wouldn't pick up the extra background noise. But that again is an AV function that we as AV professionals need to be prepared to give to the teachers in those classrooms when they're moving to this more synchronous distance learning, okay? And of course, how is HiFlex going to mix into this? Well, HiFlex adds on the necessity for the stuff happening in the classroom to also be captured and uploaded to a cloud at some point in time. Hopefully, as soon as the teacher is done with the lecture, that content is going to be stored and moved to the cloud service, to hopefully their learning management system, which you'll hear referred to as the LMS. And names for LMS like Blackboard, or there's a lot of these different LMS systems that schools will use. And so that's where HiFlex adds in. It's not synchronous anymore. It's not totally synchronous anymore. It could be synchronous, but it could also be that after the school day is done, the student needs to go and watch that video again to be able to do the homework that's been assigned. And that's part of that HiFlex model, where the student is dictating when and where and how the student is getting that education. So these are what I refer to as the modalities of distance learning. And you've got to be, when you're talking to your educational end user customers, you've really got to be honing in on what they're telling you that they need for this application. And of course, budget is always going to be key, right? Well, you've got to have the conversation with folks that, hey, you can go get an IT webcam somewhere, and you can maybe get, a simple little USB microphone somewhere. But as I move away from that webcam and I move away from that microphone over to the whiteboard, or I go do a project on the other side of the room, if I don't have the ability to make adjustments to that audio and video, the students who are connected synchronously, or the students who are going to watch the recording later, are going to miss out on what's going on. And so it does take a little bit of extra planning and a little bit of extra strategy for us as AV professionals to accommodate all of those different modes of distance learning. So I know that was a lot, but it's really kind of laying the foundation for how we as AV professionals are going to accomplish what we need to accomplish, all right? There is another key differentiator here. You need to understand. Sure.
Excuse me, Brian. We have a quick question here. Someone wanted to know if what camera you're currently using.
Oh, I work for Legrand AV. I am using a Vaddio Easy IP10 camera. So my camera is actually connected to my network. It has one single network connection headed off to a network switch. That network switch is connected to a product we call the Easy IP Mixer. And that takes the audio from my microphones and the video from my IP cameras, and it converts that over to USB so that I can send that to the go-to training platform. So excellent question. I am using Vaddio cameras and the Vaddio Easy IP ecosystem, which we have sold a bunch of this ecosystem for distance learning this summer. I mean, it has been a very, very popular product for us. And partly because you can see what I can do with it. I can walk out and step at my whiteboard and have the camera move over there and turn on the microphone and all of that kind of stuff. Excellent question, thank you. And please do interrupt again if you have any other questions while they're relevant. And so what I was saying is there is going to be a big difference between K-12 and higher education. And that difference is primarily, it's a, there's thousands more, the number of K-12 classrooms is a power, way higher than the number of higher ed classrooms. So K-12 is usually got to be on a very tight budget because they have to equip a lot of rooms all at one time. So usually the budget is much lower. The other thing that we saw happen, especially with the pandemic, is that higher education got the CARES Act, which was billions of dollars. If I remember correctly, $12.5 billion spread out over 5,000 different higher education institutions, each institution getting on average $2.5 million from CARES Act money back assigned to them late March, early April, right? So there's differences not only in the needs between K-12 and higher education, but there's also funding differences between K-12 and higher education. Right now, higher education has money. And just so that you know, we as Legrand AV, and this is anecdotal, I don't have any evidence to support this other than what I'm kind of seeing happening. We're seeing that out of that $12.5 billion in the CARES Act, we think somewhere between 5 and 12% of that is going toward AV spending. The CARES Act did specifically call out where some of this money is supposed to be spent. It said more than 50% should be spent on helping students, but the other 50%, do these things with it. And one of those things was increased prevalence of distance learning. Okay. And so that means AV, and that's what we're seeing. So if you think about that, 12.5 billion, even if the number is 10%, that leaves us at $1.2 billion being sent into the economy, being sent into the AV world for upgrades and things like that. So there is particularly a lot of money in higher ed. They have spent a lot of it this summer, so I don't know how much of it is left. But we believe that this new stimulus is going to have some effect on K-12, which we think by the time all of that settles in and the money actually becomes available, we believe that K-12 is going to go through a similar process sometime in maybe late September to early November. Somewhere in there, we're going to see K-12 get hit with some funding that will probably encourage their spending on distance learning as well. Of course, none of this I can predict with confidence, but if you are looking at where should we be spending some time and effort to try to go collect some dollars, you need to be thinking about education. Right now, knowing that there is money available in higher ed, and knowing that in probably a couple months, we think there will be a funding boost to K-12 as well. Of course, I can't say that with positivity, but if you're starting to think now, one of the materials that we have provided in this webinar today is a downloaded PDF that you can share with educational customers. That you can say, look, our manufacturers and our partners like Herman have provided this nice little guide that says, if you just need this solution or that solution or the other, and I'll talk about those guides a little bit more so that you can be more precise about helping those. But again, the purpose of this slide is really to hone in on the idea that you've got to treat K-12 differently because they're looking at a lot more quantity, a lot lower price point, and the need to deploy them quickly. So it can't be a real sophisticated, complicated system. Whereas higher ed has been looking at doing classrooms that support that high flex model. So the need to have good audio, good video, the need to record, and the need to have all that back-end support and all of those things. So higher ed's been looking at a little bit more sophisticated solutions that cost a little bit more, require a little bit more integration. So whatever your business model is, if your business model focuses more on custom integration, you may want to spend more time looking at how you can help higher ed in distance learning. If your business model focuses more on providing affordable solutions that are maybe packaged and ready to go with minimal integration needs, then maybe your business model really should focus in on K-12, understanding that we think we're about 2 to 3 months from starting to see some of the fruits of that starting to come through as these customers maybe get some money as part of the next stimulus. All right. So there's kind of those differences, all right? So let's really look at a classroom. What is a classroom going to look like? And keeping in mind that we have to accommodate, some of your customers are going to say we need synchronous distance learning, some of them are going to say asynchronous hybrid, some of them are going to throw out the term high flex, and some of them are going to talk about high flex without using the terms. They're going to say, oh yeah, we got some students are going to come in every other day and they're going to do online classes, you know, live, and then they're going to do this class. So they may not know that term, but they may be talking about that term. And so you know some of those needs that they're going to have when they start talking about that high flex environment, right? We also believe, and we feel very strongly about this, we're going to see a resurgence of portable solutions. You see that cart up at the front of the classroom there. We believe that those are going to be so easy to deploy. They're going to be cost effective. They're going to double as extra, you know, extra monitors when or if the pandemic dies down. You know, we're going to know that portability is going to be important. And so what they're probably going to ask you for on that portable cart is, look, we've got to solve this problem right now. We need to do hybrid classes, and we need to get the cameras and so on and so forth. But we know when this pandemic is over, we would love for that cart to also hold a very large interactive flat panel, so that it is not, you know, we're not wasting money on something here where maybe the distance learning part of this goes away in a year, but we still have these distance learning carts, right? So that's something that we're going to help you through as a manufacturer, and Herman's going to help you through with finding the right cart solution for that customer who comes to you and says, we need a solution that's good now, but also good later. We also know that there's going to be fewer people in the room. We know that that's going to happen. We don't know exactly how fewer. We know some parents are going to withhold their students from going to school. We know that there's going to be fewer people. So even though the space is the same size, we're not going to have as many people in it. That actually kind of helps AV, because as you get less people, you get less random noises. There's less noise that you have to cancel, and the microphones are more efficient that way. And so fewer microphones have better coverage because there's not as much ambient noise that it has to worry about. So that's actually kind of good for AV. We also know that a lot of personal office spaces are going to become training rooms. One of my primary focuses for the last 6 months, 5 months, is training and doing these webinars. And so I have equipped my office with exceptionally good equipment to be able to do these types of platforms. In fact, when we started today, I said, can I please have my webcam? Because I kind of use my webcam. I talk with my hands, and I'm going to show this information. And so my office space is equipped. And keep in mind, some of your customers are going to have some very specific needs honed in on the idea that they have a certain instructor or a certain program or something like that, where it's going to be taught from a home office or a personal office or a small office space. So don't forget to ask your customers if they have any of those needs, or have they considered those, and would they be interested in a good AV solution to resolve that. So there's what maybe training rooms are going to look like. But we also know that some conference rooms will be turned into presentation rooms. You know, as we have to social distance, we have to spread people out, we have to find more rooms. So conference rooms will become classrooms. Now, of course, there's not a lot of schools that have conference rooms. Higher ed is more prevalent to have a lot of conference rooms, but we would see the conference room needing some educational resources. So where this is kind of flipping for the AV integrator is that we've learned how to equip classrooms, and we put the stuff in the classroom. We've learned how to equip conference rooms, and we put conference room stuff in a conference room. But now the teacher's going to need to teach in the conference room. So which of those AV materials that we would normally put in a classroom, now do we need to think about offering and suggesting to our customers, well, let's put this AV resource in your conference room so that it's easier to teach from the conference room, okay? So these are things that when you're talking to educational customers, keep that in mind, that that is an opportunity for you to go after. And as I've already mentioned, we think there's going to be a lot of cart solutions that are out there. And so again, this is kind of what that cart looks like if you put it together using Legrand AV. This is a complete Legrand AV solution except the display. So add your own display to this, and you have a cart, which, by the way, this cart, the way it's configured, will do synchronous, will provide your asynchronous, will provide hybrid and high flex solutions, all in this one cart. You get all 4 of those things bundled into one single cart. So, you know, we don't do a lot of integration when we talk about carts. We understand that they're kind of almost like a hang and bang type install, right? Where it's just wheel them into the room, you know, maybe throw a couple things on there and you're done. We get that there's not a lot of integration involved here, but we do think they're going to be very popular. So you may want to figure out how your business model needs to adapt to be able to sell carts in education. I'm confident we will see an uptick, and we're already seeing it actually. So I know we're seeing an uptick in carts. All right, so let's look at some other classroom considerations. When you're talking about synchronous video distance learning, there are some minimum requirements you need. So we're going to assume that because in AV we typically don't sell computers, we're going to assume that the school already provides a computer. We're going to assume the school has found a video software that they want to use. We're talking things like Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams, you know, Google Meet, GoToMeeting, those types of things. We're going to assume they've already figured out the software piece, and we're also going to assume that they have bandwidth. That is not an assumption you can make. You may have to ask that question because they may have enough bandwidth for day-to-day use, but they may not have enough bandwidth to enable multiple classrooms with Zoom. Okay, so that is probably another thing that you have to, you know, key in on and say, hey, do you have enough bandwidth for what you're thinking about doing? Okay, but I'm going to make some assumptions that they already have those things in place because those are usually things that the AV company can't help with. All right, but the minimum requirement, they're going to need a camera for the teacher, a camera like this one looking at the teacher, right? They're going to need a microphone for the teacher. Now, again, since this is synchronous video distance learning, synchronous means it's two-way, we need to have echo cancellation. Some flavor of echo cancellation. Now, keep in mind, a lot of the video software platforms will do a good job providing echo cancellation. It may not be necessary to have hardware echo cancellation. However, hardware echo cancellation works better. It's more reliable, and it is something that you should suggest to your customers. Again, it'll sometimes start to come down to price. We can't afford the device that does echo cancellation. Okay, we get that. So let's just make sure that we set things up in a way where we're going to be successful. So in other words, make sure you have it so that you don't have to crank the volume up really loud. Make sure you have it if they can't afford echo cancellation, so that the speaker is, you know, the speaker, we're talking about the speaker that generates, which we're talking about in the next bullet, speakers to hear the students on the far end. Make sure that speaker is not physically close to the microphone. Make sure there's a way to separate the speaker and the microphone, because that's what's going to make echo cancellation work better. So that's something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Oh, the teacher's going to have a desktop computer speaker sitting right here, right next to the microphone. Okay, that's not going to work very well. You know, spread those speakers out, put them somewhere else in the room, right? So maybe you have to sell them a little, 3.5 mini extension cable that they can take and put their speakers somewhere else, right? So there's the minimum requirements: camera, microphone, speaker. That's going to get you synchronous education, which, by the way, once you accommodate synchronous and we assume they're using software, you tend to accommodate those other things that we talked about as well, those other modalities that we talked about as well. However, to make this really work well, there are some things that you should do. For instance, you should add another video monitor showing the students who are connected remotely, and that video monitor should be located close to the camera. You notice when I'm talking to you, I'm looking into the camera. It gives a very nice view of me actually trying to make my presentation so that it looks like I'm looking at you when I'm talking to you remotely. Now let me look over here where in a standard classroom, I would be looking at the monitor over there because I would be seeing you on the monitor that's over there, right? And how does that look? Is that fun? Would you like to look at me for 6 hours a day as I'm looking over here looking at you? It's not as good of a presentation, right? So a nice upgrade is to figure out a way to have a display in the front of the room for the students to look at and for all the interaction and all the content. but to have a secondary display in the back of the room, so that as the teacher is looking at the students in the remote end, hopefully that monitor, you can see I've got my fingers right up here next to my camera, right? Hopefully that monitor is really close here to this camera, so that as I'm looking at that monitor, which is all the way around this camera, I'm also kind of looking into the lens of the camera as well. So the preferred upgrade is to add another monitor in the back of the room for the teacher to look at the other students. Make that suggestion to your customers, and guess what? That portable cart works perfectly as that second monitor, right? You put the portable cart in the back of the room, put the camera on top of it. You kind of get both things at one time with that portable cart. Okay, you need microphone coverage for the entire classroom, not just for the teacher, not just a microphone here for the teacher, but a microphone that can cover the entire classroom. Because when other students ask questions, or you want to have, a social time where the students who are in the room want to talk to the students who are at home, you'll need to have some sort of microphone coverage for that. Camera coverage for the classroom, again, in a distance learning studio that I used to create, 20 years ago almost, right? We would put in 2 cameras, one behind the teacher looking at the students, and one in front of the teacher looking at the teacher. And the idea behind that is I could switch back and forth between multiple camera angles and allow the students to, again, converse and have a conversation. And they're going to really appreciate it and feel more like a regular school setting the more you can allow the students to engage and interact with each other. And of course, camera coverage for the teacher's demonstrations. Again, this falls right back on that idea that a webcam is fine if I'm standing right in front of the webcam, or if the webcam is close to me and I can point it toward myself. But it is not fine if, if we've got, me moving from my podium over to the whiteboard, or me doing a center over there on that part of the room, or something like that. So again, the consideration that you're going to have to spend more for a pan tilt zoom camera, but is it worth it based on the instruction that the teachers are going to have to provide? And of course, the last thing I want to talk about is the ability for the local students to have the ability to see the remote students. And so what that actually means is, if we think about the front of the classroom, one monitor that probably already exists showing the teacher's content, the PowerPoint, the whiteboard utility, whatever it is. A second, maybe smaller monitor right next to that that shows the remote participants, so the students can see the other students at home, right? And then the third monitor in the back of the room for the teacher to be able to see the remote students as well, okay? So that's what really the preferred distance learning classroom looks like. It's at least 3 monitors. It's, with all the distribution that comes from that and all the wires and everything else, we know that that's not easy. You have to think through those details. It is microphones throughout the room, usually mounted to the ceiling so that students aren't, messing with the microphones, right? It is speakers that are loud enough for everybody to hear, that are placed in a way where they're not really close to the microphones, but still placed in a way where everybody can hear everything. It is, appropriate pan tilt zoom camera. So there's really what a good distance learning classroom is going to look like, okay? And that comes from years and years of experience putting this together. And so now let's spend just a few minutes, I'm almost done by the way, looking at what the Legrand distance learning solutions look like. And if you want to download these as individual PDFs, we've got them on our website, legrandav.com. Click on resources, click on diagrams, and you can see we have a bunch of them in here. We have, a mobile cart for video conferencing. We have small classrooms, medium classrooms, auditoriums, executive home offices. You can see we have lots and lots of these solutions available for you. So let's look at a couple of these and what you will get when you get one of these solutions off of our website. And by the way, all of these are bundled into that one PDF you can download from the materials part of the webinar today. Okay, so go to the materials, download that EDU guidebook, and you will get these materials. Okay, and what this does is, if you see here, you have a nice diagram that shows how all of the things are interconnected, shows the parts, shows the pieces. Up at the top, we talk about why we love it. So these are some things that you can use, some trigger phrases you can use to help your end user customer understand why this is a good solution for whatever application they may be talking about, right? We also provide a list of detailed part numbers. And the only thing that's missing from those part numbers on this particular drawing is the display. So you have to find it or source a display from Herman, who can sell you lots of different displays. And then we can, Legrand AV, you can source that through Herman as well, can provide all of those other parts and pieces that you may need. Of course, I always assume that the software in the computer and the bandwidth are provided by the customer. So even though I don't specifically call that out, we kind of always make the assumption those things are provided by the customer. But there's also two other really cool things that are on this page. Actually, there's three. The first is there's a link to get the full bill of materials. And when you click on that link, it pops open a spreadsheet that has a list of materials. The part number for that material is actually a live link that brings you out to our website so you can see that specific item on our website, okay? It also lists MSRP, and it lists links to data sheets and things like that. Again, we made these resources in a way where you can share them with your customers. Any customer can download these off of our website and get an idea of what the overall cost is going to be just based on MSRP. So if you have a great relationship with your customer, you can bring these in and you can say, hey, let's just look at that and let's see about how much that costs. And you say, okay, you're going to need a 60-inch display for this room. And so that's going to add on this much to it. And you can kind of get a sense of how much it's going to cost. Our installation is going to add this much to the price, our delivery fee, whatever you want to say, okay? But we give you that, okay? The other thing that this one happens to have is a link to a really cool video that shows a render of how this is going to look in 3D, and the cart spins, and you can kind of see this is what the cart's going to look like by the time we get it configured, okay? So this is our portable distance video conferencing cart, and this one I think is going to be very, very popular, especially in K-12. And as higher ed figures out, well, we really got to equip this one room and we don't have the ability to do it all the way, these carts are going to make a big difference for you, okay? So all the part numbers you need, everything's right there, ready to go, shows you how to plug it all together. So please reach out. So the last thing I told you, the 3 extra things I told you about, is that contact us button down at the bottom. What that's going to do is it's going to bring you to a web form on the Legrand AV website where you're going to have the ability then to go right back to me. That web form actually comes into my team's inbox, and you say, hey, I saw you on the Herman webinar, and here's what I need from you, okay? And so that's one way you can get a hold of us, okay? And of course, when you mention Herman, that helps me a bunch to know that I need to engage your local Herman rep so that we together can get you what your dealer cost is going to be on that specific material list or things like that. So please be sure to mention that you got the information because of Herman, so that we can definitely point you down the right road there, okay? Here's what an installed version of that would look like. A very similar product, a little bit different microphone layout, ceiling microphones, as I mentioned, instead of a little desk microphone. But this one assumes that the classroom may already have an interactive whiteboard, or it may have an interactive display already in place that you may or may not need to put a new one in, or you may or may not need to mount. What this does not provide for is that extra display in the back of the room for the teacher to look at. Again, these are kind of those basic get you going, and then you having some of this information I gave you will give you the ability then to look at the solution, say, yes, here is the solution from Legrand AV, but do you think you want the teacher to have another display in the back of the room? Should we add in a cables to go HDMI distribution amplifier and one of their amplified active HDMI cables to bring that signal to the back of the room, and another chief mount and a small display to go in the back of the room by the camera, so that the teacher can kind of have that eye contact with the with the students on the remote side as well. So again, use the sales strategies that you already know and some of the information that you got today to help you take these and say, okay, yeah, this is a good solution, but here's what makes it a little bit better. Now, we have helped you a little bit in some of these by having this little box called Kick It Up a Notch. And what that does is that says, these are upgrades we think you can do to this solution to make it even a little bit better than it is right now. Again, the bill of materials is there and so on and so forth. So this one is, we're selling a bunch of this into higher education. This has been kind of a default higher education solution for us for actually the last couple of years now. I'm based in Central Florida, and I can kind of look at almost five or so very large educational institutions in the area who are using this solution, or maybe the one that we call the medium classroom solution. So very popular in higher ed. This one, remember I told you, kind of like I do all of these trainings now from my home office. I'm not out in the field like I used to be doing these trainings. And so this is kind of more along the lines of what you'd see in like my home office. So if you do happen to have, you know, an executive that you're talking to.
Hey, Brian.
Yes.
Before we move on to the executive office, I have one question here about some classrooms. How
Sure.
do you feel, what do you think of an interactive flat panel for this COVID era? Will it be used these days?
So that's a great question. And, you know, with the idea that, you know, we want to have touch-free environments and things like that, the teacher using the interactive flat panel they already have, it's probably not going to stop. But I think the idea of an interactive flat panel was that students come up to the interactive flat panel and they engage in the content. And that's really kind of scary right now. So I don't know. I can tell you I've been watching LinkedIn, and some of the interactive flat panel manufacturers have been selling a bunch of them. So I don't think it's gone away. I think they're still important. Keep in mind though that all of this distance learning stuff, you can use an interactive flat panel as the main display. So, you know, if you want to talk to your customers about future proofing, we know we're going to get back to the point where we're going to be able to touch things again. And so if you have to add a display anyways, maybe you should just go ahead and do the interactive flat panel to go with it. Cool. Any other questions?
That's all I have right now.
Awesome. Okay, so I don't have much more to say about the executive home office other than this is one that we put in there because you're probably having some conversations where a specific professor, a specific instructor, the principal, the counselor, or on the other side of your business, you're talking to folks who say, yeah, we still got to maintain good contact with our customers, and I got to have this, I want to have a really nice home office. So we put this in here as a what we call the executive home office, something that you can use to really equip a home office. All right, so this is our medium classroom solution, and again, we're seeing this in some of our larger higher ed institutions. It's multiple cameras. Remember I told you the idea that a camera looking at the students and a camera looking at the teacher. It has up to 4 ceiling microphones versus 2 in the smaller classroom. This one has a nice little controller to make everything work like it's supposed to. Has the AV bridge 2x1 to switch between those 2 different cameras and to stream the content. We even throw in the Middle Atlantic lectern, which if you've not seen a Middle Atlantic lectern, it is basically a high-end AV rack wrapped in furniture, okay? So the rack comes first, and then when you get on site with all the gear in the rack, you wrap it in the nice little wood pretty furniture so that nothing happens to the furniture as you're building the AV. And this again is really focused on, you know, a little bit more of those extra features that I put in the slide a couple slides ago. You know, hey, do we really want to do this extra stuff? This one kind of has a lot of that built in. One thing that you don't see here is the multiple displays. Again, that's a conversation that you need to have with your customer. How are you going to manage multiple displays? What are you going to see on those multiple displays? Where are we going to put them? That kind of thing is just kind of hard to draw into a picture like this, so we didn't include those multiple displays. And then we have a large classroom. Now, this is basically, this is the technology that I'm using, the easy IP technology I'm using right now, the network technology. Again, multiple microphones. This allows us to put up to 4 cameras on the network, so that like in that culinary class where you may have a camera looking at the teacher, camera looking at the students, another camera in the ceiling looking down on what the teacher's doing. You know, 3 cameras in that room would be perfect. Those kinds of things. It all runs through a Luxel network switch. All the PoE powers it. The Luxel switch kind of manages all of the video and the Dante audio that we're using. And again, this has our ADA compliant middle Middle Atlantic piece of lectern furniture. So again, it's a really high quality AV rack wrapped in furniture, but this one has the ability for a wheelchair to go to a wheelchair bound person to use the materials, because it's got the ADA compliance, and it's electric lift. So when you're standing at it, you just push a button, it raises up so that it comes up to a comfortable lecturing height if you're standing. And this one, of course, is showing a little bit larger display, maybe a projector screen, and those kinds of things. Again, there is a big focus you'll see throughout these on remote management, and that's something that we cannot forget to mention. As your customers deploy 20, 30, 50, 100 of these classrooms, if something goes wrong, how are they going to fix it? Okay, they may have somebody on site who can go out and fix things, but with the Vaddio solution, all of these devices can connect to the network. And when things don't work, we have the Vaddio deployment tool, which shows all the Vaddio devices that are on the network, and you can go specifically to Mr. Smith's classroom and see his Vaddio equipment, and you can see, oh, well, the microphones are muted. Just let me unmute that for you. And now it's working again. How was that? It was magic. Nobody even came to the room to solve that. So that's another place where Vaddio is really kind of kicking it up a notch, is in our ability to remotely support and manage these devices. And that's something that's included all the way down on that portable cart. That portable cart, if you connect it to the network, will give you remote management functionality. Of course, you have to spend a little bit more to have those functions and features. But again, you as salespeople need to have the conversations with the customers that says, is that important to you? You know, I mean, if the equipment is down and the students at home are missing out on something, because not only is the equipment down, you know, because it's not working for the students at home, but then it's not also being recorded to go to the LMS for them to watch later, right? So we need to have this equipment up and reliable, and having that remote management function makes it that much more reliable, makes it that much easier to support when everything's said and done. All right, there is the presentation. As you noticed, if you downloaded that PDF, you saw there's a lot more stuff in there. And if you went to our website, you saw there's a lot more stuff on the website as well. So please feel free to use those, and I would love to answer any other questions that you may have for me. Any other questions?
Hey gang, if you have any other questions, you can type it in our chat or raise your hand and I will unmute you either way.
And while I'm waiting for another question, I just wanted to illustrate one other function of this Easy IP system. So I am currently using the Easy IP camera for this webinar that we're doing, correct? And I'm going to stop sharing my content. There we go. So you can see my webcam a little bit better. But what is simultaneously happening is I have a Zoom room back here running, and this exact same microphone, exact same speaker, exact same camera, because everything's running through the network, is available to my Zoom room separately. All of this is happening through the network. So I can have multiple devices connected here at one time. So, you know, that's one of the cool features we're seeing, like Marquette University up in Milwaukee decided to use Easy IP, this system I'm using, because they wanted to have a built-in computer running everything all the time, but they wanted the professor to be able to come in with his or her laptop and plug in the laptop to the USB cable and have access to those devices as well. And Easy IP makes that possible because we're running everything into the network, and then the network sends the video and audio where it needs to go. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. So I want to thank you all for your time.
Hey gang, sorry Brian, didn't mean to cut you off. I wanted to thank Brian a whole lot for coming in and giving us this information today, and to let you know that if you have any questions and you need to talk to your sales rep, their information is available right here on our map that shows you the regions and their contact information. If you attended the webinar and if you look at your control on the right, underneath the chat, you should see a place where you can download both the guidebook and this presentation. They're in PDF form. If you see those on below the chat, you should be able to download those as well. So I'll give you guys a few minutes. I'll leave this up a few minutes just to make sure that everybody can get to it. Again, we will make this webinar available to you guys tomorrow on our blog. And you can, if you missed anything, you can come back and review it as well. So unless there are any other questions, we will finish the webinar today. And I thank everyone for joining us again. If you have questions about any of the products here, please feel free to contact your Herman representative. Thank you very much for attending. Oh, I also want to remind you that we are going to put out a survey about the webinar to get your feedback. You should see that this afternoon. We'd appreciate it if you take a moment to fill it out. Thank you.